Well, Internet, it's official. After almost 15 years, Kathleen Kennedy is no longer president of Lucasfilm. In her place are brand new co-presidents Dave Filoni and Lin Brennan, who inherit a fractured fan base and a franchise that is at a crucial turning point. Welcome back to ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Arey, and today we're going to be talking about the failures and successes of Kathleen Kennedy's time as president of Lucasfilm. But more importantly, we're going to take a look at what's up ahead and ask whether or not Dave Filoni is up to doing this job. And we're going to talk about all the Star Wars projects that are in development that we can expect as early as this year. But first, let's look back on the Kennedy years and talk about where Disney Star Wars went right and mostly where it went wrong. Now, whether you like Kathleen Kennedy or you hate her, we should all be able to agree that she was dealt a really tough hand. Her promotion to Lucasfilm president came at the exact time George Lucas was selling Star Wars to Disney. Now, that's a move that was already unpopular for some fans and had a lot of us anxious that the franchise was about to be ruined. Now, just 3 years later, with Kennedy at the helm, Disney Star Wars released The Force Awakens. Now, when it came out, the movie was an absolute phenomenon. It made more than $2 billion. It reinvigorated the franchise. It got normal people talking about Star Wars again. But in the long run, it kicked off what is, I think, by far the least popular Star Wars trilogy. Fans had been dreaming about episodes 7, 8, and 9 for decades. This was the chance for Lucasfilm and Kennedy, Disney to prove that Star Wars had a bright future even after this major change of hands. But instead, the sequels pretty much did the opposite. Rather than define a new era for the franchise and push stories forward, I always thought The Force Awakens felt recycled. Kylo Ren was another masked Darksider with a cape and a legion of stormtroopers who was a Skywalker who fell from grace. The main Jedi was a nobody from a desert planet, or at least we thought she was. The iconic Skywalker saber was even back, and even a super weapon that was like a Death Star copycat.
So it's big.
But the sequel trilogy's biggest crime wasn't copying the original trilogy. The much bigger issue was the way these movies didn't tell one story and instead felt like a big tug of war. Now, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say The Last Jedi actually built on what The Force Awakens gave it, even though I know I'm in the minority here. Rey was established as a nobody, Luke was in exile, and then Rian Johnson built on these ideas. And Kylo Ren was still the villain, even if Johnson made him a more conflicted villain who was kind of getting into his weird Force connections with Rey.
Why is the Force connecting us?
But in 2019, The Rise of Skywalker came along and wiped all that away. Now, of course, there is the movie's worst moment.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
But that was just one of several major problems with this movie. Bringing Carrie Fisher back with cinematic tricks always felt kind of morbid to me, and all three original trilogy heroes were officially killed off by the end. I mean, the final Skywalker died, and Rey was revealed to be a Palpatine, but then decided to not be one anymore.
Rey Skywalker.
The Rise of Skywalker also had its fair share of moments that just made absolutely no sense. Like, seriously, how the heck was the dagger perfectly shaped to show the location of the Sith Wayfinder, and how was Rey standing at just the right angle and distance to see that? And the dialogue is just infamously bad.
They fly now? They fly now!
So you might be saying, okay, but Kathleen Kennedy wasn't personally behind the camera making all those decisions. And you're right. She wasn't. That's part of the problem. You see, behind the scenes, Lucasfilm has had a big problem hanging on to directors. Phil Lord and Chris Miller were fired from Solo. There's rumors that Gareth Edwards was not allowed to finish Rogue One. They brought in Tony Gilroy to do the reshoots. And Colin Trevorrow originally wrote a draft for Episode 9, and he was supposed to direct. But then, when Lucasfilm disagreed on the draft, they jettisoned him, and then they hired on J.J. Abrams and his company Bad Robot. And I have heard that they actually outsourced the production of this movie to Bad Robot, so Lucasfilm did not provide much oversight into the film. So Kennedy is far from blameless when it comes to The Rise of Skywalker. As president of the company, it was well within Kennedy's job description to make sure that there was at least some sort of plan for this three-film saga. And if The Rise of Skywalker proves anything, it's that the sequel trilogy did not have this ending in mind when it started out. Yeah, but George Lucas changed stuff all the time. That's absolutely true. George Lucas did not have everything planned out. He changed things as the movies were releasing. That's why he made a couple of twins make out. But that's a bit different than a trilogy going back and forth on one of its biggest mysteries.
They're filthy junk traders who sold you off for drinking money.
You are a Palpatine.
or deciding who the real big bad was in the 11th hour. So there's a reason why, even 10 years after The Force Awakens, these movies are still seen as a low point in Star Wars' almost 50-year history. And unfortunately, I think that's Kathleen Kennedy's main legacy. Like, we all wanted more than anything else for a great episode 7, 8, and 9, and they let us down. But look, it's not all bad. Like, later we're going to talk about Kennedy's biggest success, which was Andor. Now, I cannot say enough good things about Andor, but one thing I like to praise about it is it shows how misinformation can help the government. government control a society, how people can have the best of intentions, but it's worth nothing if they're not well informed. Like, we are all so inundated with posts and news from all over the internet that sometimes it's hard to know who you can actually trust, because mainstream media has what's called a profit bias, and most of the news that you see on social media is tailored to you just to make you angry so you'll engage and see more ads. Every time you look at the news, some corporation could be trying to control you. And that's why, if you want to cut through the bias and hear the real news, I recommend Ground News, the sponsor of this video. Ground News is an app and website that gathers related articles from across the world into one place. But they give you the context about the source's political leaning, their reliability, and their ownership. So this means that you can see through the bias and think critically about the news you consume. For instance, here's a news story about the president posting an AI map showing American flags all over the Western Hemisphere. Right-wing sites call this brilliant trolling, while left-leaning outlets point out that this is not normal. I can see how many sources reported on the story, how many of them lean left or right, and more importantly, who owns those news sources. That way I know who has an angle in telling the story a certain way. Ground News is an incredible resource, and I've been looking for a service like Ground News for years, so I highly encourage you guys to check them out. If you go to ground.news/SC or click this QR code, you'll get 40% off their Vantage plan, which includes unlimited access to every feature. Your subscription's not only going to help out this channel, but you'll also be supporting an independent platform that is working to make the media landscape more transparent. The link for Ground News is below. Now back to what I was saying. Now, oddly enough, Kennedy and Disney were simultaneously having some of their biggest Star Wars successes, even as The Rise of Skywalker was becoming meme fodder.
You have his power. You're his granddaughter.
The Rise of Skywalker was released in theaters on December 20th, 2019. A month before that, on November 12th, The Mandalorian released its first episode. And The Mandalorian is far from a perfect show. Most people agree that Season 3, which is likely its last season based on the upcoming Mandalorian and Grogu movie, is the weakest season overall. And fans are pretty unhappy with some of its guest stars. And also, the increased ties to deeper Star Wars lore alienated casual fans. But you can't argue that The Mandalorian is probably the biggest success of Disney Star Wars. I mean, the first Star Wars movie in nearly 7 years is a spin-off of this show. These characters also became more popular than the sequel trilogy cast. Din and Grogu have become franchise staples in Star Wars, and that is a credit to Kennedy and Disney, who dared to branch out beyond the Skywalkers or the Jedi. The Mandalorian was a risk, and unlike other risks, like bringing back a major villain from the dead with very little on-screen explanation, this was a risk that paid off. Even before that, though, between the release of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, Rogue One, a Star Wars story, had already proven that Disney Star Wars could offer us something new and interesting on the big screen. Now look, Rogue One had its own behind-the-scenes issues like I mentioned earlier, but it's also seen as one of the best Disney Star Wars movie, or for many, the absolute best. And it definitely laid the groundwork for what is easily the highlight of Kathleen Kennedy's tenure as Lucasfilm president, Andor. Andor is easily the greatest Star Wars TV show of all time and one of the greatest Star Wars stories. It even managed to give the Clone Wars a run for its money, and that show was created by George Lucas. Andor is Star Wars at its very best. Hell, it's TV at its very best. It focused on the fight of everyday heroes against an overwhelming evil. It's full of stunning action sequences and really offered some of the most powerful speeches in this franchise.
The monster who will come for us all soon enough is Emperor Palpatine.
No matter what else you say about Kathleen Kennedy's Lucasfilm legacy, it will always include her role in Andor. She was instrumental in the creation of this show, recruiting Tony Gilroy to create it, giving him a sky-high budget, and also supporting Andor's focus on revolution. There were many times when Gilroy thought they were going to go too far, and Kennedy said, no, you're not going far enough. However, as successful as Mandalorian, Rogue One, and Andor have been, they're anomalies in Kennedy's larger history as Lucasfilm president. I mean, there have been other Disney Star Wars shows that have been done well, including the animated projects like the Tales shows and the Bad Batch, and of course Clone Wars Season 7, but for all of those, there have also been a lot of major flops. Like the Book of Boba Fett is considered to be one of the worst Star Wars shows, but that show had every reason to be awesome. Boba Fett is a fan favorite character. Tamura Morrison's a great actor. Hell, the show even had Mark Hamill back as Luke Skywalker, Rosario Dawson as Ahsoka Tano, Pedro Pascal as Din Djarin. It's got this weird spinny thing in the final fight. It's got Wookiees, it's got Rancors, and we've also got brand new Jedi training Grogu scenes, for God's sake. But for whatever reason, the Book of Boba Fett is just a mess. The show's pacing is a drag, the story's boring, Boba Fett walks back and forth to town 100 times, and this should have been one of the coolest shows in Star Wars. I mean, it was about Boba Fett. But there were reasons for all of these troubles behind the scenes. Production crew on the Book of Boba Fett have said that they thought they were working on a new season of The Mandalorian. So maybe the showrunners were forced to stretch a few episodes episodes of The Mandalorian into a season's worth of storytelling for this show. And this is indicative of a lot of the problems that Disney Star Wars faced, and, the newer Marvel projects as well. After the pandemic, Disney CEO Bob Chapek stressed the importance of streaming to Kennedy and Kevin Feige. So a lot of projects were rushed through production, or movies were turned into TV shows. For instance, Boba Fett and the Obi-Wan Kenobi show were originally developed as movies. And hell, there are even some fan edits of Kenobi that have pared it down to 2 hours, which I think works a lot better. And then, oh god, there's the sad fate of Solo: A Star Wars Story. Solo on paper should have been a hit. Takes place during the Imperial era. Han Solo is one of the most popular characters in the entire franchise. And there were also years of Han Solo's stories and lore that they could have tapped into. There's underworld types scattered throughout different Star Wars media. But Solo, fizzled at the box office. It's not even that it bombed. People were apathetic to the stories of young Han Solo. So the lasting legacy of this movie became that Lucasfilm was suddenly scared to recast original trilogy characters, which is why we're stuck with deepfake Luke Skywalker. Just like Kennedy got behind Tony Gilroy, she also invested heavily in Leslie Headland's pitch for The Acolyte. Sources say that she bought it in the room. Now, in the end, The Acolyte might be the most divisive Star Wars project ever made. Part of that was because of review bombing and bad behavior, but The Acolyte also had some really serious storytelling problems. And because of its incredibly high price tag, Disney was quick to cancel the show rather than try to clean up its problems in a second season. Reportedly, Kathleen Kennedy was furious at Bob Iger when he canceled the series, but after Iger came back as CEO, one of the first things he did was reel in the huge spending that Bob Chapek allowed on the streaming shows. Now, the last hurrah of live-action Disney Plus shows of this era was the excellent show Skeleton Crew, which was a simple, self-contained story about kids stealing a pirate ship in a galaxy far, far away. But the series didn't catch on, maybe because of its lack of characters tied to the greater saga, or maybe because fans were just so burned out on Star Wars at this point. And quickly, I want to remind you guys that I will never be burned out on Star Wars, which is why I love designing the Star Wars parody merch at our merch store. We have classics like Original Trilogy, Hello There, Darth Master Vulcan, love that one, Good Soldiers Follow Orders, I Have Friends Everywhere, Fight the Empire, and Stay on Target, plus many, many more. Links for these and the others are down below. Now, the issues with The Acolyte and Lucasfilm's quick cancellation of another season actually revealed a larger issue at Disney Star Wars, which the new Lucasfilm co-presidents will now have to deal with. See, ever since COVID, when the movie industry radically changed very suddenly, Disney and Lucasfilm have been in damage control mode. They quickly pivoted from movies to streaming, and now they're trying to pivot back from streaming to movies, and that only makes things way more confusing.
I don't get it.
After the rise of Skywalker and Solo both flopped, and with the changes brought on by COVID, Star Wars went from a movie franchise with some shows to something else, something that it seems they still haven't quite sorted out yet.
What are we?
Confused.
And then at Star Wars Celebration 2023, multiple new movies were announced, including Rey's New Jedi Order and James Mangold's Dawn of the Jedi, which, dear God, I want to see that movie. But in the almost 3 years since, neither movie has made much progress at all. In fact, it's been heavily rumored that Rey's movie has been dropped because updates have now been so scarce, but that is not confirmed. And actually, there is some good news about Rey that I'll talk about a little bit later. Other movies have had even fewer details to them, like Taika Waititi's Star Wars movie, and other films are now confirmed to be dead, like the trilogy that Rian Johnson was planning. The only Star Wars movies with actual release dates right now are The Mandalorian and Grogu, which will be out this May, and Ryan Gosling's Starfighter, which is slated for May of 2027. But before leaving her role as president, Kathleen Kennedy gave an exit interview that gave us some very surprising updates. She laid it all on the floor. Kennedy also confirmed that Waititi had turned in a hilarious and great script, and Donald Glover had turned in a script for Lando. But all of these were a little bit too different for the Disney brass. She said that when she started, Bob Iger encouraged her to be bold, but then Disney itself turned out to be the ones who were afraid of stretching Star Wars beyond what people already knew. Kennedy even mentioned the movie Hunt for Ben Solo. Now, this was a film that Adam Driver and Steven Soderbergh worked on together, and they pitched to Lucasfilm before Disney shot it down. And that announcement had the internet going nuts. Boo! Boo! And she suggested that even this movie, though, could still be on the back burner. But everything that Kennedy said was couched in the fact that now it's not up to her. The future of these movies are going to be up to Dave Filoni and Lin-Wen Brennan, and that leads to a lot of new questions about whether Filoni in particular is even right for this job. Now, there is an overlooked part of Disney Star Wars that excelled beyond anybody's wildest dreams: their publishing arm. For instance, Marvel's relaunched Star Wars series, telling stories that took place after A New Hope, became the highest selling comic book of the this century, but the crowning achievement of the Disney Star Wars era might just be the High Republic. These stories are set hundreds of years in the past and tell the story of space pirates called the Nihil fighting against the Jedi. It's a sprawling story told across comics, novels, YA novels, and audiobooks. It ignited the imagination of creators, and soon we suddenly saw the High Republic Jedi popping up in video games, TV shows, and even comics that were set during the original trilogy. The publishing arm proved that Star Wars could tell a broad, interlocking story in a new time period that would excite creators to add to the galaxy. While most Disney Star Wars felt derivative of what George Lucas created in the 1970s, the High Republic always added more than it took away. And also, Kathleen Kennedy did leave a new trilogy in active development. Simon Kinberg, a screenwriter with a huge list of Hollywood credits, is creating a trilogy set after the events of The Rise of Skywalker. Reports have said that this movie is being fast-tracked and it's going to involve Rey and a new threat rising in the galaxy. But now let's ask, is Dave Filoni actually up to this job? Now, Dave Filoni is known as George Lucas's protege for a reason. They co-created the Clone Wars together, and over the years, Filoni has proven again and again just how much he knows about Star Wars. I mean, at this point, he actually probably knows more than the creator himself, at least when it comes to all the current canon. But that level of knowledge and lore is exactly what has some fans kind of nervous about the news that Filoni is going to be co-president.
I got a bad feeling about this.
So Filoni, who has been the chief creative officer of Lucasfilm for some time, will be focusing on the creative side of the studio, while Brennan will handle more of the business side. And that sounds like the right fit for Filoni, who is clearly an ideas man. But some of his Star Wars projects like Rebels and Ahsoka have shown that he can really struggle when it comes to making his shows more accessible to the average viewer. Filoni doesn't mind getting into the weeds with obscure things like the Mortis gods or the World Between Worlds, but that might not work for a broader audience, especially people who want to go into theaters without having to do hours of homework. Like his live-action Ahsoka series could have just had a simple premise. Former apprentice of Anakin Skywalker roams the galaxy trying to do good. But instead, it became bogged down in lore from the animated shows that Filoni created. However, reports on season 2 are saying that the series will have a leaner budget and be more focused. So hopefully, Filoni is the kind of creative who can recognize his mistakes and learn from them. However, Filoni's also going to be overseeing many movies, whereas his background with Lucasfilm so far has mostly been TV shows. In Filoni's shows, he likes to try mystical approaches or focus on his own characters like Ahsoka Tano, and that works for animated TV shows or a limited series. But if something breaks the mold too much and ends up on the big screen and audiences don't like it, well, Star Wars fans aren't exactly known for being forgiving.
I say we kill the beast!
Currently, we don't really know what Filoni's new role in Star Wars will look like. On one hand, he could be a true ideas man. He could act as the creative genius behind the scenes. And if he's willing to work with people who are better equipped to run a studio to help him keep things manageable, well, then his transition could be great news for Star Wars. See, a key part of being a studio executive isn't adding ideas, it's knowing when not to add ideas. Kathleen Kennedy was right to give Tony Gilroy as much free rein as he needed. And I don't see how this is a bad thing at all. I mean, it's been clear for a while that the franchise needs a shakeup, and a new co-president who loves Star Wars and knows it so well just doesn't feel like bad news to me. But Kathleen Kennedy's presidency proved just how quickly the person in charge can end up being blamed for everything. And when it comes to disappointed fans and intense backlash in Star Wars,
I am inevitable.
But guys, that's just our thoughts on Kathleen Kennedy and the future of Lucasfilm. Big shout out to Liz Declan who wrote this video. You can find her social links below, but I want to know what you guys think. Do you think this is great news? Are you worried at all about Dave Filoni and what he'll do with Star Wars? Do you think we're going to get endless Ahsoka projects on top of Ahsoka projects? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, or you can find me on our free to join Discord server or over on my Substack. Links for those are below. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.